All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Russ Nichols. I am the chair of the Middle Mile Advisory Committee. Let me welcome you to the Middle Mile Advisory for the month of May 2022. We'll jump in here momentarily. This is our second meeting that we're conducting in a hybrid format, so we actually have folks in the room as well as joining us online this morning. So we will start momentarily with roll call. We do have a lot of content to get through this morning, so please bear with us as we work through the agenda. And Jules, let me have you call roll for the members of the committee.
Good morning. Before we begin roll call, we'll review microphone instructions for committee members. For committee members attending in person, please click the speak button on your microphone console to speak. The button will show a red border when your microphone is on. Please click that same button to turn your microphone off. That button will not show any color when it is off. For committee members attending remotely, you should have the ability to mute and unmute yourself. We'll begin roll call. Director Nichols.
Here.
Commissioner Hoke.
Here.
Chief Deputy Director Miller.
Here.
Chief Deputy Director Keever.
Here.
Secretary Tong.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. Senator McGuire. He does have some scheduling conflicts and may join for part of the meeting if his schedule permits. Assemblymember Quirk Silva. Assemblymember Quirk Silva
Here.
may
Here.
Thank you. Assemblymember Wood. Before we start the meeting, a few housekeeping items. For those attending in person, we respectfully request that you both mute and turn off the speakers of any electronic devices you may have with you in order to avoid audio feedback interruptions. If you are not a committee member or presenter, please refrain from raising your hand until the designated public comment period at the end of the meeting to ensure we have enough time for presenters. Presenters, please cue Cole to advance slide. Committee members, if you're in person, please cue Russ. And if you are online, please raise your Zoom hand. The chair calling on you helps make sure you're heard. And finally, microphone instructions for presenters. For in-person presenters, please click the push button on your microphone console to speak. The console will show a small green light when your microphone is on. Please click that same push button to turn your microphone off. There'll be a faint green color when the microphone is off. For presenters attending virtually, you should be able to mute and unmute yourselves when the chair calls on you. And we do have a quorum, Chair Nichols.
Thank you very much, Jules. And during the introductions, Assemblymember Wood was able to join us as well. So good morning, everyone. We will jump in to the agenda quickly, but before we do that, let me call on the members of the committee and see if they have any opening remarks. Let me start to my left with Secretary Tong of the GovOps agency.
No update today. Sorry, I missed the last meeting, but I believe GovOps was well represented, so I appreciate the looking forward to the updates today.
All right, thank you, Secretary Tong. And to my right, Chief Deputy Keever.
Yeah, just a pleasure to be here with everybody to continue to move this program forward, and Caltrans updates will be provided as part of the agenda. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Keever. And let me run through the folks that are online with us. Commissioner Hawk.
Yes, thank you. I'm here on behalf of President Reynolds today. I do have some updates and can provide those at the appropriate time on the agenda, and look forward to hearing more from the other members today.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And from Department of Finance, Chief Deputy Director Miller.
Good morning. No updates from us. Well, I guess I'll briefly just say, Mr. Nichols, that the state budget does propose in the out years an additional $1 billion for $600 million in 23-24 and $500 million in 24-25, just so we can continue to make sure that supply chain issues and labor issues are accounted for in terms of project planning. So it's a contingency plan, as well as ensuring that the ring topography and the resiliency and the redundancy, as we actually just learned from Dr. Wood in Mendocino County, how important that is with the outage, that our program has all of those components to it. So I know that I'm sure Mr. Monroe will go through that as well, but just a quick update on where we stand with the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Now let me go to Assemblymember Quirk Silva.
Good morning, everybody. And yeah, we also wanted to chime in about what we did see as the potential funding in the budget for 1.1 billion additional dollars to this project. I think one of the things that will keep echoing is, of course, what are the priority projects? When can we be able to give feedback to not only our assembly colleagues about where we might start? I know you'll be talking about the 225 million that's been put out today, but just to make sure that we're able to communicate to our colleagues about how this money will be used. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember. And finally, Assemblymember Jim Wood.
Thank you. And I guess I just want to put an exclamation point on point that Deputy Director Miller brought up, the concern about redundancy. And I'm fairly certain that in a large urban area, had what we experienced in Mendocino County happened, it might have just been a flicker. But when we don't have a really redundant system and an outage happens, it wipes out entire communities and creates a huge challenge for public safety, as well as business, education, you name it. And so it's crippling, and in an area where we already have limited access, it's a challenge for us. And so as we go forward, this redundancy is really important in every community and not just urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wood. And as you'll see in the presentations, those are some of the tenets of moving forward that redundancy as we build out the network. So with that, let me transition directly into a presentation by Mark Monroe, the executive presentation for the Middle Mile. Mr. Monroe.
Yes, good morning, committee members. Mark Monroe with the California Department of Technology. And I want to start out with an executive report out here. Two big items wanted to highlight. As I think somebody's already noted, this week we signed a couple contracts for a total of $225 million towards the procurement of at least 3,000 miles of fiber, as well as conduit, vaults, and other materials that we'll need for this project. And so, if you look at the 225, it's about half of that is for fiber, for 3,000 miles of fiber, and the other half is for the other materials. The contracts do allow us to expand that, and certainly we want to build more than 3,000 miles, but we wanted to really be able to mitigate against the future, the risk of future supply chain challenges as the rest of the country ramps up for their broadband projects. So that's I think a big achievement. I think we're all very excited about in terms of being able to get ahead in line in terms of the materials in the years to come here. And then the other thing Ms. Miller talked about was the BCP. So the May revision came out this last Friday. It includes $1.1 billion general fund for this project, for the Middle Mile Broadband Initiative. It is not in budget year, but it is spread out over 23-24 and 24-25. And it's really to address several risks that we've all become increasingly aware of. Obviously is one of the things we'll be talking through a little later today is the needs of the overall network, right? And so we look at the ring topology, as we look at really how we reach the unserved throughout the state. We do see the risk for the need to build additional miles, and as well as regional exchanges and repeater huts. All of these components that we need to be able to really have a fully functioning network. We also looked at the inflation risk, and over the 4.5 years that we have between now and when this project needs to be completed, the inflation could easily increase costs by more than $400 million. And in addition to that, as you know, other states continue to ramp up their efforts in broadband, we do see the demand for both labor and materials going up, which is going to drive costs up normally. And so these are some big risks that we've identified, and the 1.1 billion really is intended to be able to address those risks and make sure that in the out years that we have that we have the funding to be able to build as much of the system as possible. And I just wanted to note, I think the Legislative Analyst's Office had asked about why we would need the money now, and I want to be really clear that we need the money now because over the next year we're going to be deciding how much of the system we can build and having Caltrans focus on that build segment. So if we have the extra funding, that will mean that we have Caltrans design a larger portion of this network as a build as opposed to leasing. And I think that's, we want everybody to understand that SB 156 really envisioned that we build as much of the system as possible. And so, you know, to the extent that, that any of these other cost pressures materialize, the balancer without the additional funding does end up being that we're able to build less and lease more. So it's really important that we secure these funds now, even though they won't be needed in terms of the construction costs until the future. And with that, I want to turn it over to Scott Adams, the Deputy Director for the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy, to talk through and kind of provide an update on where we are with the NTIA funding.
Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe, and good morning, Chair Nichols and Middle Mile Advisory Committee members and the public. My name is Scott Adams. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. Next slide, please. As Deputy Director Monroe has said that, you know, I know that this committee has been tracking that, including in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there was $65 billion designated to close the digital divide and invest in broadband and, you know, throughout the nation. Wanted to provide an update that last Friday, May 13th, that the NTIA, the National Telecommunications Information Administration, released 3 notice of funding opportunities for 3 significant programs they are administering. The first is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. The second is for state digital equity planning grants. And the third is the Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure Program. If the state chooses, and we expect it will, to participate in these programs, want to give a heads up that both BEAD and state digital equity planning will begin this summer. Next slide, please. Both the Department of Technology and the Public Utilities Commission are analyzing the notices of funding opportunities for these 3 programs that are quite extensive. Just wanted to give the committee members and the public a brief update on what some of the early analysis shows. The BEAD program eligible uses are really for funding broadband planning, deployment, mapping, equity, and adoption activities. There's a total funding pool nationwide of $42 billion. Each state will receive a minimum allocation of 100 million and may request up to 5 million of planning funds in advance. And the total state allocations will ultimately be determined after the release of the federal data map that will be released by the FCC. The immediate next steps are there's a deadline for the state to submit a letter of intent by July 18th, 2022, and a deadline to request initial planning funds is due by August 15th. On the digital equity planning grants, those are essentially to enable states to develop a digital equity plan, which is a prerequisite for subsequent funding for state digital equity capacity grants. The total funding pool nationwide for this particular program is $60 million. California's tentative allocation is approximately $4 million, and states must submit their applications and letters of intent to apply for this program by July 12th. And then the third program is the Enabling Middle Mile Infrastructure program, and that's allocated to fund construction, improvement, and acquisition of middle mile infrastructure. There's about $980 million in that, nationwide in that pool. The NTIA expects to make awards in the $5 million to $100 million range. There is no state allocation for this funding pool. It is going to be, entities will have to submit proposals, and they will be reviewed on a competitive basis, and applications will be due for these funds by September 30th, 2022. And that is my update.
All right, thank you both, Mr. Adams, Mr. Monroe. That was informative address. Let me go to the panel members first and see if we have any questions for either of the deputy directors. Secretary Tom.
Not at this moment, thank you.
Mr. Keever.
Yeah, Mr. Adams, I did have one question with regard to the federal funding. Are we able to utilize that going backward in arrears for any of the current costs, or do you foresee any need to do that, or do we feel that any funds that become available we can put to use in the current program?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Keever. We are still analyzing the NOFOs, and we're going to have to circle back to you on that question.
All right, thank you. Ms. Miller, any questions for either of the deputy directors?
Nope, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Commissioner Houck?
No questions at this time, but thank you for the detailed update. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Assemblymember Wood, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Question is, I heard from Mr. Monroe is that this 1.1 billion will allow us to build more and lease less. So does that mean we're building over areas that we could lease? Is that the intent? Because I could see other potential uses for some of the resources, like maybe helping people actually get access through communities on last mile projects and things as well. So the question is this to build over existing infrastructure that could be leased, or are we looking to build more where there? That's what I heard. So I'd like some clarification on that.
Sure. And so, yeah, to your point, SB 156 really did envision the state building its own network as much as possible. Our highest priority, obviously, is going to be reaching any of the communities that are unserved and the underserved communities throughout the state. And we'll have to see, how far the money takes us on that. There's also room to go ahead and lease, but I do think in some cases where there might be existing infrastructure, but perhaps it's not been it's been too costly for communities to use it or to have access to it, or hasn't been open access in the past. There will be to a certain extent a need to build where some existing infrastructure currently is already. Just as part of providing increased access and increased affordability, but really the existing the funding is the additional funding is intended to continue to be consistent with SB 156 and trying to build as much of the broader network as possible.
Well, I guess when I'm thinking about building the broader network is trying to get access to as many people as possible. And I am just, I recognize that we want to build as much as we possibly can. And I appreciate that. But if there are lease opportunities of opening networks up and the opportunity to build in other areas that are less served, How does this play into redundancy, for example? Will this $1.1 billion help in redundancy on areas that we build out in? Is that a possibility? Or are some of these areas that are just going to be getting middle mile, are we ever going to have that?
Yeah, so when we look at the broader needs of the network, the longer mileage, that redundancy is definitely part of that. And that's, it's a valuable lens that our third-party administrator brings to the project in terms of identifying, the need for that. So certainly these funds will be used for that as well as part of that broader middle mile need.
So will we get an opportunity to see, what the other build out is versus what might be available for leasing? Are we going to get a chance to see that information going forward?
Yes.
And when?
So a little later this morning, I'll be walking through kind of that broader map that we are looking at having Caltrans start the pre-construction work on. And then I think for the first time this morning, Golden State Net will be presenting some map of some existing infrastructure. It's an ongoing project that they're working on in terms of identifying where that is. To see what potential lease alternatives we have. But again, I think we generally understand SB 156, with regards to the middle mile and the funding provided and the program, is that the direction is we're able to build as much as possible so that we can use this one-time funding to really develop a network that the state owns. And so a point I think on the leasing, and I'm using the term leasing for to reference IRUs. We still have to make, those are still payments that have to be made every 20 years usually is the norm. And so it's not exactly apples to apples in terms of comparing what you're going to get there, but I will say that if to the extent we lease and to the extent we have IRUs, those are ongoing costs that the network will have to have. Those are revenues that will have to be charged. And so we are trying to use the one-time funding as much as possible to establish this network so that ongoing we have as much control over it and reduce costs going forward.
Mr. Wood, if I may, I think some of the questions that you're asking are actually in some of the subsequent presentation.
Fair enough.
So absolutely happy to entertain those questions as we go through, but I think we do have some material for you.
Fair enough. I did have a follow-up question for Mr. Adams, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
And it'll be brief. So the Mr. Adams, you talked there in your slide about the BEAD, I guess is what we're calling it. You talked about FCC maps. What are those maps? What are those maps and what do they look like? And how does that compare with maps that we have at the PUC?
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Wood. Those maps have not been released yet, so we don't have a whole lot of visibility into those. I know my colleague, Rob Osborne from the Public Utilities Commission is online. Rob, do you want to add a little context to this question or to the answer?
Yes, thank you for your question, Assemblymember Wood. The FCC is doing a data collection right now based on locations compared to what they were doing in the past, which is based on census blocks. So that data collection is still in process, and that data will be, I believe, used by the NTIA as the basis for determining the BEAD allocation. So we don't have the visibility, as Scott said, to those maps yet, but we expect to be able to see those and have input on them when they come out.
Okay, thank you. I think those maps are really, really important. All the maps are really, really important. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Assemblymember Wood. Member Quirk Silva, I saw that you had your hand up.
I just really quickly was going to ask where, if we are successful in attaining some of these new funds, whether it's through the federal government or even through the state budget, which agency will administer this funding?
That's a great question, Assemblymember Quirk Silva. As I mentioned at the top of my presentation, both the Department of Technology and the Broadband Office and the Public Utilities Commission are analyzing the three NOFOs that are actually pretty complex and will require a lot of coordination between state agencies working on broadband. We continue to talk that through, but no designations have been made yet in terms of which agency will be leading on those.
Thank you, Member Quirk Silva. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple points on the questions Dr. Wood were asking. I think they're really important in the budget contingencies that we discussed. So we never want to oversimplify this issue of build versus lease. Absolutely. First, we're looking at the entirety of the program and where there are cost efficiencies. So to the extent these into feasible rights of use actually create cost efficiencies, and along with the third-party administrator, we negotiate leases that are in keeping with the network, that are open source, that provide the resiliency and the ring topography we're looking for. Those will be part of the system. So I always try to stay away. I feel like I use this word every single time at this meeting, of binary issues, because it's not one or the other. It's how now does the state control and run an infrastructure that will serve the entire state. We continue to want to work with our colleagues in ISPs and cable in order to make sure that these services are being provided. So that's the first and foremost what we're looking at, is how to build that kind of resilient network for the state. So we're working with building, of course, working with leasing. What I'm sure the third-party administrator will speak to when they speak is that there are nodes that some of our colleagues like Google and others have to run their systems that we'll be paying off of. So it's an entire network we're looking at. So I just don't want to ask a question about this funding that's on building or leasing, when really every time we ask a question, it should be on the network as a whole. So I really do hope that clarifies in terms of the funding in the out years, right? So none of this funding is in the budget year. It's all in years, I'm losing track of the years, but in 23, 24, and 24, 25, depending on where we are at those times, and if costs keep going up, to make sure that we have the contingency to complete the whole project, because we know that this is a very large undertaking. So I hope that sort of clarifies. I hope that's okay, Mr. Monroe, in terms of the clarification there too. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. All right, Commissioner Hulk.
Thank you. And I just want to say I appreciate Assemblyman Member Wood's questions and Director Miller's responses, and just wanted to note that there are some projects that are in the works right now that are either tribal or local projects that are going to be in some of these areas where I hope that we are coordinating with them and looking at whether leasing may be better for areas that are already being planned or potentially funded to build out, and making sure we're being efficient and cost effective in that regard, and having those discussions with local and tribal governments that may have projects in the works.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, that wraps up that first agenda item of the executive report. We'll now jump into a little more detail actually in the presentation. And let me start again with Deputy Director Mark Monroe. Mark, go ahead.
All right, very good. Yeah, so again, Mark Monroe, if we're going to go to the next slide here. And so, I think just to recap, we're all familiar. The Public Utilities Commission has, gone through a significant effort in terms of analyzing statewide maps and where the communities are, and had estimated about 9,470 miles earlier this year in terms of kind of what that map would look like. And so that's the first thing we want to point to, and it's really intended to, consistent with SB 156, reach out to all of those unserved and underserved communities. Go to the next slide. And so last month, Golden State Net had presented a map. It's more of a system level design that was about 8,650 miles long, and in the important lenses that the Golden State Net had provided was that ring topology, and I hope we're all becoming familiar with kind of the importance of that in terms of reliability. It's much like telephones, and where we, for public safety purposes, we need to make sure that we have more than one access point to communities. And so that's really what the Golden State Net had built into its recommended system level design. It had also done identified some routes which were fairly close. If you just think broadly about 99 and 5, right? Two highways that kind of go the same places in a lot of ways in terms of the north-south direction. And there are places where they're fairly close. I mean, there's some segments, throughout the state where Golden State Net had recommended maybe we don't build, we choose one, and so we're not too duplicative. And then an important methodology that was used as well was the idea that when we call them spurs, but really these we create this backbone, but a lot of the unserved and underserved communities throughout the state really are, they're not directly on that backbone, right? They're off, they're off of state highway systems, but they're perhaps out in more rural areas. And so there was, the approach taken at that map was that, which was valid, these could be funded using other last mile funding sources. And so that we would create the state's backbone, but if they were more than, if they were within 25 or 30 miles of that backbone, last mile funding could be provided or could be used to fund connecting back to what they were recommending the state build. Next slide. So what CDT has been doing with that map and kind of our approach, what we want to talk through today is if we were to combine the Public Utilities Commission's approach, which really kind of maximizes that the ability to reach out to those unserved and underserved communities, but combine it with the ring topology approach that the Golden State Net had come up with, we would have, the result would be a 10,000 mile map that we would want to have Caltrans start construction on, or start pre-construction work on right away. And it does remove some segments that were outside of that GSN had recommended we build out of the state for the purpose of that ring topology. So as well as some others, there were, I think the assumption was that rings would be they were targeting 50 miles. And so I think in some cases we're removing some segments to make some of those rings larger, to drive down costs a bit there. And then we would, I think the really important part is adding back the spurs that would connect an additional 400,000 households throughout the state. And that's really central. Again, we felt that the purpose of this really was to reach those unserved and underserved communities. And so it's important to go ahead and fund a larger or develop a network that is larger and does more to reach out and build out to those communities. And what we will do with this map is to give it to Caltrans and ask Caltrans to start its 2-year pre-construction process immediately. And so that's important because, again, historically it's taken about 2 years. We're pushing to go faster. I know Caltrans is as well, but historically 2 years is not, it is a reasonable time frame. That means that 2 years from now is when Caltrans would be ready to go to construction, start signing construction contracts, all of which need to be signed by the end of 2024. So I think that's the other really limiting factor we're trying to work within here in terms of getting Caltrans started on all of these segments so that they can start that 2-year process. Next slide. So we're going to kind of take 2 approaches here. We're going to get to the statewide map in a second, but what I wanted to kind of start out by zooming into the Santa Barbara area here. I think this helps kind of illustrate the different approaches. So we're starting here with Golden State, the map that Golden State Net had presented last month at the MMAC meeting. And go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, and so this slide just adds in some black lines. This is really where, this adds back the components of the Public Utilities Commission map, and you can see that how they run down through Lompoc and down through Santa Barbara, and to connect those areas as well. Again, this could all be funded using last mile funding, but these are all areas that have unserved and underserved populations that the Public Utilities Commission had identified. And next slide. And so I'll kind of point to two things here. If we all see the dotted line, the hash line on the right, that is a segment that for ring topology, absent building out this other PUC segment, you would want to build in where it's hashed, where the dotted line is there. And what that would do is, provide that resiliency for anybody within that ring. And so the approach we're looking at taking here, one of the things we have to consider is, do we remove that and then instead build out that PUC map, and build out that extra PUC link. So we're still getting the ring, but we're getting closer to the communities that were recommended by the Public Utilities Commission. And if you want to go to the following slide. So the map that we would be recommending, this is what that would look like. And you can see that it has a number of spurs to reach out to the communities that I was talking about. So it has a number of spurs that reach out, but it also provides that broader ring topology that is needed for that system resiliency for anything that was within that ring. Next slide. All right, there we go. So, so here's the broader statewide map, and again, we can kind of see this is the first map here is the Public Utilities Commission's map of the 9,470 miles. And again, you can see, especially going up to the valley, but even in most of the rural areas, you're going to see those spurs that are being recommended. If we go to the next slide. This is where we'll be able to see some additional segments being built in between to make, you kind of see there are more rings here and fewer spurs. And that's, I think, the thing to point out. The rings are good because they add that resiliency. And in this scenario, the spurs would be built out using last mile funding. And then if we move to the last one, you can see what we're recommending, what we're going to ask Caltrans to start doing pre-construction on. Is that a combination of those. So we still have a number of rings, and it looks like, yeah, we still have a number of rings. There we go. No, look right. So we still have a number of rings to provide that resiliency, but we also have the spurs added back to really reach those communities that are out there. This is something that, we've continued to receive comments from members in those communities, and I think they were important participants and partners in the Public Utilities Commission's processes in terms of identifying here's where the unserved and underserved populations are. And what I wanted to do is look at is just kind of to add scale to this, I guess. When we look at building out these spurs, one of the lenses that we've used in terms of is the number of unserved addresses per mile. By really building out these spurs, we end up potentially reaching communities that another more than 420,000 households throughout the state. And I think that really underlines the importance of this and kind of why we want to take this broader approach. And so I mean, that's really, again, the policy reason for us doing this project to begin with. Going forward, what we will do is give this to Caltrans. We will have them start that pre-construction work, that 2-year process. Part of that process will be to identify the actual cost estimates for building this network. And depending on what that cost is, that's going to tell us ultimately how much we can afford to build versus how much we need to lease. At the same time, we will be doing a market assessment to get a better understanding for those last mile providers where dark fiber service versus lit service might be needed. It's going to help us prioritize in terms of, to the extent we we're able to choose between building in certain areas and leasing in certain areas. We want to make sure that we make those choices that are consistent with what the last mile provider and the community needs are. And then the Golden State Net, as I mentioned, will be presenting kind of the first stage of a map of existing infrastructure throughout the state. And as we refine that, that's going to help us understand kind of what that alternative is, and as well as we'll have to, as Ms. Miller talked about, really look at that network and how to best serve the state where it makes the most sense to lease an existing infrastructure to make sure that the state's dollar goes as far as possible. So I think with that, I want to turn it over. I think that's the last slide here. Yeah, so here we go. Yeah. So go ahead and go to the next slide. It covers what I just talked about in terms of our plans. And with this, I want to kind of turn it over to, first of all, answer any questions that you might have, and then turn it over to Tony Naughton from the Golden State Net.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. Before Tony starts, two quick things. I want to welcome Senator Gonzalez, who was able to join us as well in this mixed format. It's hard, I think, for folks in attendance, both virtually and in the room, to tell when people have come online. So welcome, Senator Gonzalez. Before we move forward, did you have any comments, opening type comments for the proceeding?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for, again, all the great work. I thank my colleagues as well for being on and continuing the good work across our state. And I look forward to continued progress. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm so sorry my video has been off. Talk about broadband issues. My apologies.
All right. Thank you, Senator Gonzalez. Any questions from the panel members for Mr. Monroe? Secretary Tong.
Yes, just more of a question and perhaps a clarification, Mr. Monroe. I don't know if there's a way to go back to the earlier slides. If not, it's okay. I'll just talk through it. There were, and this perhaps linked to the earlier question, the extra funding that is being requested right now is not necessarily all attributed to the extra mile, but it was more of as a planning proactive measure because there are some differences between what the GSN recommended, as well as what the original CPUC map have laid out, that CDT is looking at continual analysis to make sure that all the area that need to be covered, especially the most underserved area, are being accounted for. And that's one of the message Joanna came across on that particular map demonstration, right?
Exactly. And that's an important distinction between the extra funding. So when you look at this map, there's certainly an additional pressure, and this is one of the cost pressures that we identified or that we're trying to address with the funding. But it's there, I think inflation and the other demand on, increased demand for labor and materials is also, there's some important cost risks there. So it's not, it's not intended to be a one-for-one. We want to make sure we develop a map or we develop a network that really meets the needs of the state and really links up the unserved and underserved populations. And that's really what we're trying to achieve with this map. But right, it's not a one-for-one with the BCP, and the BCP really is intended to address a broader range of risks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Wood.
Yes, thanks. And with regards to the maps, there was, and they moved through there quickly. There was one map that showed a ring that is in far northern California that extends up into Oregon. And that's an important for Del Norte County that I represent, because it's allowed some redundancy for them and access that they have that other parts of my district don't. So is the intent to maintain that redundant ring? Because I'm unclear how that map interacts with the other maps. And is that ring going to go away, or help me understand how that interacts, because there is redundancy there that I would hate to see go away.
Yes, the great question. That there is no intent to reduce any redundancy. That first, when we look at that first map that really goes up into Oregon, that was really, that was being identified as a potential build location.
Okay.
And we're just saying we don't want to build up there. And to the extent we have existing resiliency, existing infrastructure that we can use for resiliency, we really want to focus on that. So yeah, there's absolutely no intent to reduce any redundancy.
The reason I ask is I did see, and I thought I saw in some of your earlier comments that some redundancy in some areas would be reduced. Did I miss something? Or
So
that's what I saw.
Yes. Yeah, to clarify there, the risk on the redundancy goes down to the spurs, right? So
Okay.
When we look out to some of those communities, we can build one line out there, and then we're providing that link. But there is we're not planning on building two lines out there, and I think that's where the primary risk that we're looking at is we've done our best to map out a network that does provide that resiliency. But if you were to double, trench, say, both sides of the road in terms of trying to provide that redundancy, that drives up costs and mileage substantially. So the idea is, there is some increased risk, right, to those communities on the spurs, but we're looking for the time being, providing that funding and kind of the approach is to that we build out to these communities, and then they have we still have the last mile providers to come in, and they will have options to provide for resiliency as well on those spurs. And so I think we'll have to partner with them on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wood and Mr. Monroe, and Mr. Keeter has a question.
Yeah, also to Mr. Monroe. So I want to acknowledge the challenge that you have had in trying to develop these maps, trying to pull all this together very quickly. I want to make sure I understand, though, it sounds like we may have some benefits, though, at the same time, in that by having multiple sources of funds. So we have the federal COVID funds, we have general fund dollars now that may be coming in, and then we have the IDGA BEAD funds from the federal side that may also be opportunities for us. My question is, in moving forward, I believe we can go forward and do a lot of the pre-construction work. Unfortunately, we have a lot of very strong Department of Finance and other expertise on this team, and then have the ability to use those funds strategically. So for instance, on the spurs, it sounds like we have several options on how we might want to fund those. But from that, then we can take advantage strategically which pot to pull from. And we don't need to determine it necessarily today, but at the time of allocation. Is that, does that broaden our opportunities?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Absolutely. And in addition to that, I kind of go back to why it's important to secure, any funding we can today, because really, by going out with a 10,000 mile map, Caltrans can do the 2 years of work it needs to do to be ready for those opportunities.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions from committee members for Mr. Monroe? All right. Not seeing any, we will transition to a presentation from Golden State Net, our third-party administrator for the Middle Mile Network. Let me introduce Tony Naughton. Tony, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Russ. Tony Naughton with Golden State Net, the third-party administrator. Small correction to the introduction slide there. My title is actually President and Chief Operating Officer. I don't want to unduly promote myself there. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Right now, Golden State Net is very focused on work efforts and processes to support a transition for this entire program from a design phase really to a development and execution phase. And the key activity in that transition to support the execution phase is to inform, support, and enable an optimization process for CDT so that CDT can make final decisions on network development, of which there has already been quite a bit of discussion in this meeting this morning. And network development, of course, is newly built construction of optical fiber versus purchasing indefeasible rights of use for dark fiber. And then the third mode of development is joint build new optical fiber with other open access network operators. To talk a little bit more about the optimization process, I'm accompanied today in our presentation by Eric Hunziger, who is our Vice President for Network Development. He's going to explain the optimization process and related factors in more detail. Eric?
Thanks, Tony. Let's go ahead and move into the next slide. Thank you. So as we're working with CDT to analyze the elements of build or buy, there's several factors. I believe already it's been mentioned that we should be working with local entities to understand projects that are in process. And we do have a handful of opportunities where we're looking to build approximately 1,000 miles of joint build opportunity. In those conversations, the ultimate goal would be to establish a network that the state wholly owns for its own purposes. So we're going through that process with individual carriers, which include national carriers. It also includes local areas. We've already covered one of them substantially in partnership with CVAG in the Coachella Valley. And then in addition, we are talking to tribal entities. So that's a small mix of the potential build partners that we are looking to partner and develop resiliency for regions in the network. In addition to that, we are also evaluating commercial partnerships where it makes sense. But as Chief Deputy Director Miller already noted, those partnerships need to meet a bare minimum of functionality. If contractual terms, as Deputy Director Monroe laid out, aren't meeting the needs of the state's network, they're really not useful. And every commercial entity has a different priority and business model that defines those IRUs or leases in contractual terms. So what are the minimum elements to partner with carriers? It has to be a true indefeasible right of use for the use of connectivity, come one, come all, broadband for all, open access. That's a minimum level of relationship that we need to enter into in order to utilize commercial networks. In addition to that, flexibility of interconnection. We can't be tied to networks that do not allow for last mile connections that are not yet developed for communities. Typically, commercial carriers only allow interconnection where they currently have splice points in their existing network. And often that's a rule of thumb is about every 5 miles. If we're not able to access those points to develop last mile connectivity, contractual terms, the relationships with those carriers aren't really useful. So those are the minimum bars that we've set for the state to begin to analyze, CDT to begin to analyze the value of commercial partnerships. And then in addition to that, there's some other elements of costs and feasibilities and routes that also dovetail into that to reduce the overall time to market and the costs of the overall contractual value to the state in terms of the network. Next slide, please. So I've already covered a little bit of this. Numerous commercial entities aren't interested in open access network for competitive reasons. So each individual commercial entity, we're interested in talking to anyone that would come to the table, but we have to figure out whether the partnership works because the state's network priorities are to serve the last mile, and often that can be competitive in nature. So that's an element that each business entity must understand in order to partner and reduce their costs as well, particularly in joint builds. In addition, we're working to identify any new opportunities across the state to reduce the overall construction element of the network. And that would include partnering with the CPUC and CDT and evaluating the existing CASF grants or pending CASF grants that might be interested in perhaps participating in construction or post-installation buying from the state network after it is developed. Next slide. And here are some of the routes that are a part of current open access. I want to apologize. There's one route that we do not have on here. It did not make the cut in commercial terms for representation on this map. Digital 395 has also extended IRU terms to us, and I apologize to the senators and assembly members for not having that on this map. It will be there next time, but they have tendered an IRU offer. These routes represent commercial carriers who have made proposals. It's not limited to these routes. We're continuing to just explore additional relationships as they become, fruitful to evaluation by CDT. And so I think you can see that there is, I believe Assemblymember Wood noted, that there's a substantial open access network through the state. We look to leverage those where it is meaningful and meets the minimum threshold for value to the overall network. Next slide. Here we'll just see the statewide map again, which Deputy Director Mark Monroe covered in detail. Thank you. I'll hand this back to Tony Naughton for some additional points. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Eric. In addition to finalizing network route designs with CDT, which is central to the optimization process, the third-party administrator is also continuing to work closely with Caltrans on new build specifications and practices. Other key activities that also represent significant portions of the budget include a focus on what are called ILA repeater huts. These are the retransmission huts that reamplify the optical fiber signal approximately every 50 miles in the network. We're very focused on the capital expenditures needed to support those, very much focused on the locations as well as the maintenance costs ongoing for those repeater huts. And of course, there's continual work on analyzing and making specific recommendations for active network gear. This refers to switches, routers, servers that will be used to provide a high quality production network service on the middle mile network. Other activity that's worth mentioning for the past month or so since the last MMAC meeting, Golden State Net submitted an initial draft of what's called the program plan. I've made reference to this once or twice in earlier meetings. The program plan is a network implementation playbook that characterizes the steps and processes to be followed in developing this network. We're also working closely with CDT right now on creation and refinement of a business model which projects operating expenses and revenues projected for the network in the years ahead. The real focus and purpose of this business model is to project and ensure as much as possible long-term operating and maintenance costs for the middle mile network, which really needs to be a self-sustaining network for these purposes. And then the other thing worth mentioning right now in terms of ongoing activity, we've been working closely with CDT and its consultants in the development of a survey for last mile providers. That survey issued out to ISPs and telecom carriers, primarily last mile providers, if not exclusively last mile providers, went out recently. It will be coming back within the next month. And then, of course, we will work closely with CDT and its consultants to analyze those results as they will shape the services that are offered, the pricing for those services, and related operational aspects that the last mile provider customers of this network will be interested in knowing about and want to have input on. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions we can answer?
Thank you, Tony. Let me ask the panel members in the room, any questions for Golden State Net? Nope. Any of the members online? I see Commissioner Hulk.
Yes, actually, just a comment connecting some of the information here with the last presentation. I just wanted to note how much we appreciate the planning for the spurs that were identified on the maps, and just note that they're really vital to making sure that we can meet our last mile needs. So I appreciate you walking through all of that, and just wanted to highlight that point.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or comments from committee members online? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. All right, thank you both Tony and Eric for the presentation. Let's move on now. Next item on the agenda is a presentation from Mr. Rob Osborne of the Public Utilities Commission. Go ahead, Mr. Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I'm Robert Osborne, Director of the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. The committee, go ahead to the next slide, please. The committee is familiar with this overview from previous meetings, but since our last meeting, the Commission yesterday adopted program rules for the California Advanced Services Fund adoption, public housing, and consortia, as well as funding allocations for fiscal year 22-23. We're doing outreach through a variety of association meetings and anticipate increasing the outreach in June as program details are finalized. These include the Broadband for All roundtables hosted by the California Department of Technology, the Caltrans broadband meeting last week, individual meetings with counties such as with Butte County and Chico last week, and also county CIOs next week. We also have a survey underway right now for local governments to assess their community's broadband assets, their broadband needs, and interest in state grant programs. The survey responses will inform the program development and outreach, and we're asking survey respondents to respond by May 30th, and I'll include a link to this survey in the chat. This provides us an informal way of soliciting information and engaging beyond the formal proceeding process. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges facing not just California, but the nation as a whole is how to incentivize broadband deployment in areas where private industry has been unable to justify due to insufficient revenue or high capital and operational expenses. The table on this slide categorizes various levels of private and public entity involvement along the value chain in the broadband networks in ways that may be helpful for grounding discussions about last mile programs. The table goes from fully public models in row 1 at the very top, where it says municipal broadband, down to fully private in row 5, where it says full private broadband. The columns divide the type of work that can be assumed by either a public or private entity over the course of full network development. You'll see on the slide, the blue shaded cells are the work of public entities that they do in the deployment, and the gray cells are the private entity activities. I want to highlight 2 points about this table. First, as shown in this slide, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's a variety of different solutions that may be applicable to California. I want to note that for the bottom row, the full private provider option, the public entity is still involved in managing the rights of way and utility infrastructure. So in other words, public entities still have a role no matter how broadband infrastructure is deployed. Second, the rightmost column lists the city where these models have been deployed. And you'll see in row 4, where it says private developer open access, the city of Fullerton is an example of where Sci-Fi Networks built a privately funded service-based competition network. And that's where one private entity owns the network infrastructure and sells access to that infrastructure to 2 or more internet service providers who compete for customers. So if you think about the service you currently have in your home today, it could be one ISP that owns the cable or telephone line going into your house. Imagine that being a pipe instead, and that pipe has many service providers offering service over it. So that is an example of how that would be realized. The CPUC recently hosted a workshop, which was recorded. It was the California Advanced Services Fund annual workshop. And one of the panels focused on examples of how municipal broadband and local governments can be involved in broadband deployment, and I can provide a link to that video later. Now I'll move on to the last mile program updates. Next slide, please. So the local agency technical assistance, just to recap, the $50 million in technical assistance grants will be available to public entities and nonprofits to help them prepare to provide service in their communities. The funds can cover a range of pre-project costs to deploy last mile broadband infrastructure, including environmental permitting, needs assessment, and strategic plans. For the decision, individual grants are to be no more than $1 million per applicant, and there's an expedited process for requests of $500,000 or less. A local agency is broadly defined in the program rules. It may be a city, a county, including a county service area, a community services district, public utility district, municipal utility district, joint powers authority, local educational agency as defined in the education code, a sovereign tribal government, and an electrical cooperative. The CPUC is preparing the program materials and processes to open the grant-making window in late June or early July, and we're planning to host a recorded webinar before then. Next slide, please. So the Loan Loss Reserve Fund, just as a recap, the broadband package committed $750 million over 3 years for loan loss reserve funds. The purpose of this fund is to assist local governments and nonprofit entities in securing financing so they may build out their last mile infrastructure. The loan loss reserve is a form of credit enhancement that will provide collateral to local governments and nonprofits for bond financing. The timing for the proposal for this is August of this year, and comments and workshops will follow. And this is scoped into the California Advanced Services Fund proceeding under Commissioner Houck. Next slide, please. The last mile federal funding account. So the lion's share of the last mile federal funding will be granted through the federal funding account. The CPUC adopted program rules last month, and the rules include an allocation by county of funds out of this $2 billion tranche for last mile projects. The CPUC is targeting to accept applications by July, and the priority, or we're going to be publishing a list of areas that are priority areas based on unserved locations, and then that will be the basis for submitting applications. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the California Advanced Services Fund, yesterday the PUC adopted program rules for adoption, public housing, and consortia accounts, as well as deciding on the allocation of funds among those sub-accounts. As you're aware, over the past decade, the California Advanced Services Fund has supported a large range of investments. The program was updated with the legislation last year, and the decision yesterday formalized those in program rules. Just as a reminder, the adoption account as of last year had awarded 212 grants for adoption projects, 179 grants for digital literacy, and then in public housing, 128 public housing adoption grants and 322 public housing infrastructure grants. With the rules now adopted, we're targeting to begin accepting applications in late June, early July. We're working on a proposal now for the infrastructure grant program, and we are working to get that out for public comment very shortly. And this concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Any questions from panel members in the room? No. Commissioner Hulk, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of additions. I wanted to just note that the public housing program that Rob just talked about, part of the rule updates includes farm worker housing in the definition of public housing. And there will also be a proposal from our staff to address the broadening of that definition to additional low-income housing that'll be vetted publicly. And to just note that the PUC is doing tribal consultations throughout the state right now through a rulemaking on our tribal policies, and broadband issues have come up in almost every case. So we are meeting with tribes across the state on broadband issues, and my office is planning to meet with unserved and underserved communities throughout the state. And we'll be going to different locations to talk to local governments and getting input and engagement regarding the loan loss reserve program and some of the additional updates that we're vetting. And we really appreciate all of the work that our staff has been doing and the coordination between the PUC and CDT on all of these important efforts. And just want to note how much time, effort, and work has gone into this by both agencies. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions or comments from other committee members online? Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Ms. Miller, did I see your hand?
You did because, oh, sorry.
There we go.
I do just, Mr. Osborne, on the loan loss reserve program, could you just review the timing on that one more time? Just so I'm clear on kind of when the funds will be available. Thanks.
I need to have a staff proposal for comment in August. And prior to that, we'll be holding, possibly having public comment and workshop on that.
Okay, so potentially if the proposal's up in August, what does that mean for when the funds are then available?
So we're targeting to have funds available in the first quarter of 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from committee members online? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Osborne, for the presentation. All right, moving now to our final presentation of the day from Caltrans. Let me introduce Hardeep Thakkar. Hardeep, go ahead.
Good morning. This is Hardeep Thakkar. I work with Caltrans, serving as the Broadband Middle Mile Network Program Director, and will be providing a progress update today. I'll be covering the delivery strategy with target dates and the status of the program that we're working on, and then the work that's underway at this point. Next slide, please. Caltrans continues to collaborate with the Department of Technology to develop projects to build the middle mile network on the state highway system based on the anchor build map that's been provided to us. This map includes initial 18 project locations that will cover approximately 845 miles on the state highway system that were approved to begin pre-construction work, which is preliminary engineering and environmental studies. And the remaining non-initial 18 locations statewide that approximately cover 7,255 miles. In order to accelerate building the middle mile network, we are evaluating existing highway projects to identify Dig Smart or Dig Once opportunities that will leverage ongoing highway projects by lowering the capital cost to build the middle mile network infrastructure, and also avoid and minimize disruptions caused by the need to rework in these areas. Specifically, we're looking at highway projects currently in construction and those that will be in construction in the next 3 years. Where existing highway project opportunities are not viable, Caltrans will develop standalone projects dedicated to build the middle mile network. At the initial 18 locations, work related to preliminary engineering and environmental studies is underway, as you can see on the schedule. We're also concurrently reviewing the remaining non-initial 18 project locations mapping to identify project opportunities in June with a target to begin preliminary engineering and environmental studies in July. Our goal is to complete the pre-construction work for both the initial 18 and the non-initial 18 locations by July 2023, complete preparation of the construction contracts by June 2024, and construction award by no later than December 2024. In order to comply with the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA timeline requirements for encumbering funds. For project locations that are more likely to have challenges with environmental clearance, permitting, and working around existing utilities, we will consider opportunities to streamline project delivery to get us to the December 2024 construction award by working with resource agencies to develop programmatic permit approvals and consider alternative delivery methods in addition to the traditional design, bid, build, delivery method which include construction manager, general contracting, job order contracting, and design build where appropriate. The target will be to begin construction no later than January 2025 and complete construction by September 2026 to allow time for project closeout by no later than December 2026 in order to comply with the ARPA timeline requirements for liquidating expenditures and project completion. Next slide, please. At the initial 18 locations, work related to pre-construction, which is preliminary engineering and environmental studies, is underway. Multiple projects are being developed within the 18 locations. To date, we've identified 9 Dig Once opportunities that plan to build approximately 90 miles of the middle mile network and 22 standalone projects that will build approximately 605 miles of the network, adding up to a total of 31 projects to build 695 miles of the network. The remaining 150 miles within the 18 locations are under evaluations to identify additional projects. Our target date for completing preparation of construction contracts is June 2024. We expect construction to begin at the initial 18 locations as early as June 2022 through December 2024. Next slide, please. At the remaining non-initial 18 locations, we are currently identifying project opportunities by June 2022, which will include, again, Dig Once and standalone projects with the goal to begin preliminary engineering and environmental studies in July 2022. Target date for preparation of construction contracts is June 2024, and we expect construction to begin on these non-18 initial locations by June 2023 all the way through December 2024. Caltrans is committed to this broadband initiative and delivering the middle mile infrastructure to meet the needs and connect communities across the state. As we receive new updated statewide mapping from the Department of Technology, we will follow the project development process to identify challenges early on and find opportunities to streamline project delivery through the use of programmatic permits and alternative delivery methods. That concludes Caltrans update. Thank you for your time and take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Thakkar. We ask the panel members at the dais, any questions for Mr. Thakkar? For the committee members online, Assemblymember Wood, I see your hand.
Yes, a question. I saw on the timeline that was up there, there was a reference to construction beginning in January 2025, completing September 2025. What is that? Because your slides didn't reflect that. So your slides reflected ongoing construction. So what is that construction that's supposed to begin in January 2025?
That is the construction for all construction contracts. We are planning to begin, whether it's for the initial 18 or the non-initial 18 locations, no later than January 2025. And our goal is to complete construction by September 2026 to allow enough time to close out and make payments to the contractor and close out the projects by December 2026. We need 2 to 3 months to close out the projects, make sure the expenditures are all processed.
But you are actually trying to do construction. You're not holding back on construction.
No, we're not. We're starting construction. I think we're gonna, as early as June 2022, where the opportunities are on the existing highway projects, we will begin construction as early as June 2022, and but no later than January 2025. That is the plan.
And just one, and curious, do you how much more Dig Once opportunity do you anticipate out there? And this is personal for me. I've been trying to push you guys on Dig Once for years. And I'm impressed that you found 90 miles on the first 18 projects, but only found a mile in the in the several years before that when you had the opportunity. So how many more miles do you expect?
We're currently evaluating projects. We'll have a more specific feedback at the June meeting. We're looking at about 45 ongoing construction contracts like right now that overlap with the anchor build mapping that we've been provided. So And then there's certainly projects in the pipeline that are in the design, planning and design phases that will provide opportunities. So we'll have more of a specific update at the next meeting.
So you'll have more numbers on Dig Once then?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Assemblymember Wood. Any questions from other members of the committee online? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Thakkar, for the presentation. At this point, we'll move on into the public comment period of the meeting. Jules, if you will give the rules of engagement for public comment, please.
Certainly. In order to allow everyone who would like to make public comment the time to do so, we respectfully request that the comments are limited to 1 person per entity and 2 minutes per person. In order to have the most equitable participation possible, we are not using the Zoom Q&A function. So if anyone has submitted public comment via this function, please either provide public comment during this portion of the meeting or submit public comment through the committee website. We'll go in order of online public comments, virtual attendance, and in-person attendance. We do have 2 groups that have submitted online public comments. Is there anybody in attendance from Common Sense and Next Gen California? They submitted recommendations about funding for broadband deployment and adoption. Mr. Neufeld, is that you? Mr. Neufeld, we're asking you to unmute. You should have a button that's popping up.
There we go. Got it. Thank you.
Before you go ahead, are you representing Common Sense Media or Next Gen?
No, I'm representing the Fresno Coalition for Digital Inclusion.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wait because we're doing the online submissions first, and then we'll go ahead and we'll attach that Common Sense and Next Gen California submitted public comment to the meeting recap / minutes. We also received online public comment from Santa Cruz 1st District Supervisor for future middle mile projects for Santa Cruz residents, particularly those in mountainous regions. Is there anybody from Santa Cruz here? If so, please raise your hand. Not seeing any hands, we'll go on to virtual public comment. Please raise your Zoom hand to make a public comment if you would like to do so, and we'll go with Mr. Neufeld. Please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. So I just want to first of all say thank you for this work, all the work that's being done to design, rollout, a network to serve all California residents, especially those most underserved. The Fresno Coalition for Digital Inclusion is a cross-sector collaborative of almost 30 organizations. And we appreciate the meetings we got with the CPUC, Golden State Net, and Broadband Office following our public comment and email on the April Middle Mile Advisory Committee meeting. We just want to remind, because we haven't yet seen that in the work here, that the existing FCC and CPUC maps, especially the CPUC preferred scenarios, significantly underrepresented the underserved and unserved in our region. For example, the city of Fresno, it shows less than 5,000 are underserved. Our data on the ground shows 25,000 to 75,000 residents underserved and unserved. A big difference, and that means that impacts those sort of analysis where the middle mile goes, where open access middle mile is crucial to create competition and quality service in our areas of high poverty. Similarly, FCDI provided priority areas for middle mile to ensure that last mile opportunities for the most unserved areas are possible. And this guidance was based upon local expertise from the county, the city, our K-12 organizations, Fresno Housing. So that's where we reflected what's necessary. And regardless of funding source, middle mile, last mile, we just want to make sure those show up on the map, and including the southern part of the city of Fresno. One last piece is we just also want to advocate for regional interchange in our area. I would suggest also in Bakersfield. With that, I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana, I don't know if it's pronounced Zake or Zaki. Apologies. Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Zake. And we were wondering who at GSN, if it is GSN, is the best contact for entities who are interested in IRUs or the build partnerships.
Tony or Eric, can you please respond to that?
Yeah, I'll be happy to respond to that. From the standpoint, are you asking, pardon me, are you asking from the standpoint of requesting that on behalf of a provider carrier that has leased capacity?
Yes.
Or as a member of the public at large, just to clarify your question?
Yes, as on behalf of somebody who has capacity, yes.
I see. For now, I would offer you should contact me directly.
Okay.
I'll put my GSN email in the chat forum. And at that point, either Eric or I, or both of us together, will work with you in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Katie Hydorn.
Hi, my name is Katie Hydorn. I'm Executive Director of Insure the Uninsured Project. We're a health policy organization, and just want to say thank you for the incredibly informative meeting today, and looking forward to reviewing all of the materials after this meeting in detail. Just had some questions and almost a comment. We're working to really bring the potential anchor institutions, hospitals, and possibly federally qualified health clinics to the table to make sure that they're included in both the middle mile and last mile conversations in their communities, but also at this level and trying to engage them. Just curious, has mapping been done around those institutions in addition to sort of the educational institutions and libraries, or is it planned for that? Thanks so much.
Mr. Monroe, can you please answer the question?
Certainly, and actually, I would. As I noted earlier, the Public Utilities Commission has gone through an analysis in identifying the initial 9,470 miles, and I believe that analysis included the anchor institutions. So I don't know if Mr. Osborne has any more details on that, but I know that is one of the important lenses that was identified in SB 156, and it was something that was included in those maps.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. So for those in person, if you could please line up at the designated area, which is if you're looking at the dais from the audience, on the left, you will see a little area with a lectern and microphone. Please line up there, leaving enough room for everyone to socially distance themselves for public health purposes. When it's your turn to provide public comment, please press the push button on the microphone console to speak. The console will show a bright green light when your microphone is on. Please click that same push button to turn your microphone off.
And thank you, Jules. We have no one in the room.
Okay, we did have a couple more people submit public comments online. And Ms. Hydorn, did we address your question there? I'm looking for your name to, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure the question was submitted. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe a follow-up to what Mr. Monroe said. What type of outreach is being done to those health institutions in particular? Are there opportunities to engage them in stakeholder conversations, or going beyond the mapping, since you're doing multiple roundtables and things like that?
Given the time constraints, we are going to have somebody follow up if you send that via the email account, so we can ensure this is public comment and not Q&A. And we'll be happy to have somebody follow up.
Thank you.
And then we will attach the public comments submitted by Scott Pullman and Diana Zaki to the minutes and recap. It does not appear that we have any more other public comments today, Chair Nichols.
Thank you, Jules. I appreciate that. Let me take one last question to the committee members. Any closing comments for the group? And any from the members online? With that, thank you all for attending today. Middle Mile is obviously a huge undertaking. It is very exciting to see the progress that's been made. I want to thank all of the parties across the agencies who are working so diligently to do this and for all the presentations today. So thank you very much. Our next committee meetings will be June 17th and then in July 22nd. Following that, the committee at this point anticipates moving to a quarterly schedule for our committee meetings. And thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in June. And with that, the committee is adjourned. Thank you.